I'm being joined on the program by the Chief Economist at SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje, joining us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Alaje, thank you so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's piggyback on what is playing out between the AfDB president and the presidency. So I understand the AfDB president has thrown up a few numbers in giving impetus to some of his calls for bold or bolder reforms in that sense, not cosmetic approach to politics or policy changes, but real changes, and he calls for things like access to electricity and every other thing that needs to drive an economy in that sense aggressively, given the aspiration of the government. But some of the numbers he quoted are the things that the presidency through Bayo Onanuga has actually responded to. And they say it's inaccurate, it's not correct, it's verifiably not correct based on their data. So we understand that Nigeria's GDP stood at 4.2 in 1960. So if we have a population of 45 million people, that means if you do the computation of GDP per capita in that sense, which measures that output and income per person, is less than $100. So that's their premise. And they also say that right now, if our GDP in value terms, in terms of dollar terms, about $82 billion, compared to our assumed population size of 230 million people, our GDP is less than 1,000, but clearly over maybe 700 or 800. So maybe 8 times more than that. So they said based on this is wrong. And they're even talking about the fact that GDP per capita is not the only tool. In fact, they call it a poor tool for measuring the standard of living. So perhaps, I don't know whether Adesina was talking about lived experience or just relying based on data. But I'm sure you've seen this news. I like your interpretation of what is playing out here, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the health of our economy via the GDP per capita.
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me once again. The GDP in Nigeria, from available information, according to Mr. Bayo Onanuga, is around $100. And when you look at what it is today, it's around $800 per head. That's per capita. And I also do not fault Mr. Adesina, because when you look at economics, is not, you don't take it in blanket lines to say that, because it was $100 then, and now this is what it is. There are other parameters, which is again where Mr. Onanuga mentioned. There are other parameters which includes what is happening to education, what is happening to health, what is happening to inflation, what is happening to poverty, what are so many other things. So if the GDP per capita as of then was $100 truly, and Nigeria is not housing the largest number of poor people in the world, then you know that certainly what we had then in terms of what it can do is certainly different from now too. How do you measure poor people in 1960? It's certainly not the same amount we are using today. Today's figure is $2.15. As of then, it's clearly below $2 from what we have now. So when you compare the number, it's important for us not to look at them, you know, in absolutism, as to because the number was relatively lower. I would say that what was the number in 2016, what was the number in 2012, and what was the number in 2014 or 2015? That's about 10 years ago. Nigeria had approached a point where we got up to $3,000 per head. Today, we are far below what we had in 2015, which is approximately, which is less than $900, which is what GDP per head is saying. But I think beyond GDP per head, what we should focus on as a people to understand what macroeconomic variables are saying is to look at the indicator. First, what is happening to inflation? Inflation numbers today is about 24%, and that is rebased inflation.
Oh, there. Okay. I hope we can get Mr. Alaje back. Mr. Alaje, if you can hear me, we're still listening to you, but maybe a glitch of the network affected us. Trying to ensure that just to compare what is going on. So just as a reminder, just like a background. So the presidency has been responding to the African Development Bank president's statement over the state of the Nigerian economy using the GDP per capita, which is basically a ratio of the GDP relative to the population of a country. in that sense. So basically measuring people's output, it can be used to measure the output as well as their income. So the in economic terms, it also helps to understand how well we're doing and the buoyancy in that term of an individual based on dollar terms. So right now we're less than 1,000, and then in 1960 we're about $100 in that sense. So that's why the federal government is faulting the additional position. Ms. Alaje, please, you can go on.
Sir Jeffrey, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Now, the difference between what Mr. Adesina is saying, which I'm not sure whether deliberately or he assumed that people will understand it, is that dollar itself has a value. As of that time, dollar was based on the value of gold up until the time that dollar was taking off the gold value. The dollar you saw in 1960, that was 100, is over 1,000. It's over 1,000 now. In economics, we don't take absolute value. That number that looks like $100, when you check what that $100 we buy in 1960, is far higher than what it will buy today. So I also saw that people are comparing that people were paid 45,000 minimum wage, 45 Naira minimum wage, and they are being paid, say, 70,000 now. We need to check how much was Pojo, how much was all the vehicles that were used, brand new vehicles, in that time, in 1960, and how much is it today? So when we are comparing, economists are very careful about just comparing in absolute terms. It's important we compare in relative terms. So yes, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina was not wrong with his presentation because, of course, as an economist and to have held that kind of position, I believe that he has taken into cognizance the relative value of the dollar. And the relative value of the dollar that is earned then is far better than the per head income we are earning now. The spokesperson for the president is also not wrong when you speak absolutely regarding what the GDP number was then and what it is now. The GDP number then, the per capita income then, the number he quoted was right compared to what it is now. But what matters is not how much it is what can it buy. Can you buy what the minimum wage then, what we earn then, can we spend the same amount to have the same value? Again, the quality of life. What is the quality of life then, and what is the quality of life now? These are things that people should pay attention to. And to compare very well, you need to look at different economic parameters. One is what is happening to inflation. What was inflation in 1960 and what is inflation today? Clearly speaking, inflation today is far higher than what it was in 1960. I don't know if you can still hear me, sir.
Well, can I hear you? Go ahead.
Then when you look at exchange rates then till now is a far cry. Nigeria has not even started spending Naira. But today, as of 2025, is 1,590 or 1,610. It's around that figure. Then you look at what we are also doing in terms of poverty. Poverty, according to World Bank, in Nigeria has soared significantly to above 30%, and 75.5% of everyone living in the rural community are living below poverty line, 75.5%. That is the recent number that is released. And we also have people that are living in urban center that are poor. And that number, according to the World Bank, is about 41.3%. So clearly, we have more poverty now than we had then. So, but you see, it is not whether the presidency is right or Dr. Akinwumi Adesina is wrong. What should be clear to everybody and to all of us that are Nigerians is that the love of our country should come first, and if there is any way we can make our country better, is what we should look at. And what are those things that can make our country better? I will mention them again. There is no future for any country who does not produce sufficiently some of these finished goods. You see, Africans have been bottled to a thought that we are to farm for the rest of the world. Okay. The rest of the world also has access to farm. They can also farm. I'm not saying farming is wrong. Farming is good. But what is the essence of agro output that you have that you cannot process locally? And to do that, what we need to do is to ensure that there is adequate electricity, power supply, among other things that adjoins to that. But what I've seen recently is that we are even planning to possibly hike the cost of energy. And when we do that, I mentioned, when the last time it was increased, I mentioned that Are we going to see an increase in output of electricity? We saw it for some months.
All right,
but
Mr.
can
Alhaji,
we
if
still say
I may
that
come
band
in,
A is really A indeed?
My apology. We're going to go to let's call it the line items now in how the people are responding and what it is that is affecting the people, which you've started mentioning. But I also wanted to mention as to what is really important, because I see in the release as well, Mr. Adeshina was saying why we await the recalibrated or the rebased GDP, which we haven't seen yet. He's saying that Nigeria in terms of GDP may be 50 times or 100 times bigger than it was in 1960. That's not correct. If we're doing by $182 billion as it is today, given what has happened to the exchange rate, is less than 45 times, if you will. So 100 is just a political statement. And I saw that they were a bit cheeky on this particular one as well, taking a swipe at the AfDB boss, referencing Peter Obi and verifiable data and all of that. But that's just politics. Let's stay with what concerns the people, exactly. which are the things you're talking about. And one of the ways I want to go to that, before going to electricity, PMS, and all of that, we have an issue that we should talk about the more. The World Bank has projected that we are saying our GDP will grow by about 4-something%. We did 3.4 last year on the average. Q4, we did 3.8. So they are saying between now and 2027, which is our election year, we may lose about 1% from where we let's say where we are, if you put it in that sense, because they are projecting 3% this year and maybe 2.7 by 2027. That's on one hand. I looked at the NUPR numbers in terms of oil production. Do you know that January we did 1.5 crude oil, not condensate? Crude oil we did 1.5 January, February we did 1.4, March we did 1.5. I haven't seen the April numbers. So what is it that we're really doing, since crude oil, for now, is our biggest cash cow in terms of export earners revenue, because that will impound it directly on our revenue sources. The dollar is, the crude oil price now is less than $60. So I want you to speak to all of this, perhaps prepare the minds of Nigerians as to the kind of economy they should be expecting beyond the political talk of hope, renewed hope, and all of that. Let's talk about facts.
Well, I think that what IMF, if you like, sister agency to World Bank, already provided some clear warnings to authority as to what we may expect in the future. Even though I have a lot of reservation about IMF numbers, but it's important for us to note that they also talk about possible revenue concerns that we may have this year and perhaps going forward. We are losing over $10 on every barrel of crude oil that we export or we get revenue from, because of the budget that we already have at $75 per barrel. And we have two lines. We have the revenue line, we have the output line. On output line, we're expecting over 2 million barrels a day. When you look at average of January, as you rightly quoted, it's less than 2 million, February less than 2 million, March less than 2 million. In terms of pricing, since President Trump came to office, the price has also reduced significantly. What does it mean for 2025 budget? One, it means that revenue side will significantly reduce. Two, government have options either to refrain from spending, and most of the time this spend will come from capital, but if government must spend, we have to borrow more. What happens when we borrow? What will happen at the end of the day is we need to service this debt. Of course, the debt profile today is over 100 trillion naira in today's Naira terms. So clearly speaking, the output is not looking exactly exciting, even though authority is doing everything possible to make sure that the situation improves. From some of the things that we have heard coming out from authority, that they are doing their best to make it work. But what I can tell you is that World Bank is projecting that the growth we have, we might lose part of it. In fact, IMF forecast is even worse than what World Bank forecast looked like. And these reports were released just in the just concluded meeting that was held by different countries in Africa, including IMF and World Bank. And I know that they say, yes, yeah, we have devalued our currency, or we have floated our currency. And two, we have also removed subsidy. But the expectation of the agencies was that maybe things will improve as quickly as possible, particularly for IMF. But clearly speaking, things are not improving as you expect it to be. And for IMF, is saying our inflation numbers in 2026, 2027 may go back to 30%. Mark you, not of the old number, but of the rebased number. And that is why tonight my concern should be, how do we solve these problems? If this warning happens that will happen to us, what we need to take away from what Dr. Adesina have said, and what perhaps I'm also sharing here, is solution, solution, solution. So that at the end of the day, it will not be like it happens to us when JP Morgan gave significant warning and made some requests from Nigeria, but until the economy slumped, that was when we started taking the action. Already we have economic concerns, and this is obvious. It's not, I don't need to sound like broken record. You saw what unemployment number, poverty number is saying. You've also seen inflationary number. You've also seen some concerns, at least to measure what is happening in social media space. So right now, how do we solve some of these concerns? I think should be paramount to everybody and not well-meaning Nigerians.
Let's go to that solution part. As we begin to wind down, let's go to that solution part. I have a lot of concern for the have-nots in Nigeria. In fact, they say that the experts have said that the middle class is almost wiped out. So literally, what happens to Nigeria and Nigerians, especially the poor ones, is the fact that whatever benefits them seem to be taken away all the time. What happened to PMS? They say there's corruption, is helping more of the big men and the rich men. So rather than help the rich men, although the poor is benefiting, let's collapse it because it's a big wage bill on the federal government, 6 trillion naira a year, we can't afford it. They took that out. PMS subsidy gone. Well, now, Band A has also taken a hit. Also subsidy gone for Band A users. That's not all. FX, because we import a lot of things, has also not been subsidized. So everywhere the poor man turns around to just get some succor from the Nigerian state, the Nigerian state has pulled it out. I don't know whether this is a contravention to Section 16 of the Constitution. So where can the government start solving this complex problem, I must admit, of helping the poor at the same time managing the affairs of state so that everybody benefits?
First is to realize that the pure market system cannot work in a developing country. Absolutely. Adopting a pure market system of forces of demand and supply cannot. Just put this to test. We can isolate a state in Nigeria and say that the price of PMS, and please, people need to hear me in full, is 10,000 naira, and watch whether people will buy or not. The truth is that some persons will still buy. Remember when the PMS price jumped to 600, 700? For some weeks, people said no. After a while, people were forced to buy. But that people have now loaded that on what they are selling. People have expected higher salary. At the end of the day, what exactly changed? Because over the time, those that are advising us, these are the style and strategies they adopted, not just in Nigeria, funnily enough. The same strategy was adopted in Argentina and a few other countries, but you check for Venezuela and Argentina that are adopting similar strategy that Nigeria is adopting. Have they really changed? And that is why it's important for us to know that we have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable amongst us. And if we must protect them, we have to look at some issues and perhaps add to what we are doing or review some of the policies. And if you ask me, the way to start, like I said time and again, is to be very deliberate in making energy available and affordable for production. See, no matter how much we speak, we sound like my friends from the north that calls it Dogon Turunchi, that's PB grammar. What matters here is if we are not producing, we will be susceptible to those who are producing for us, to those who are providing us with things. So if truly we will save the situation in Nigeria, what we should look at is everything that will make us. And let me give you an instance. Our pupils just resumed. Nearly 40 million of them. Check their school uniform, as basic as school uniform. Where are those uniforms coming from? From China, from India. 40 million. After a year, some of them will buy again. Can we start solving our problem one after the other? While we focus on manufacturing, protecting that industry, we cannot allow them to say that they should be thrown into the same competition with those who have protected their market over time. China did not just become China overnight. There was a time where China protected the manufacturing sector for them to be what they are today. You saw how countries were going to visit America. But how did Xi Jinping respond to it? Because he has the capacity to produce. At the end of the day, he that leads is the one that gives. He that leads is the one that produces. What is Nigeria producing sufficiently? Apart from what is underneath our foot, I mean, if you check complexity index, what are we producing that is from the content of our brain? When you compare the two, if what is beneath our foot in terms of FS contribution is beyond what is on top of our brain, I tell you that those who are producing from the brain will get our crude cheaply in terms of negotiation and exchange rates, and we will still have to pay more. My advice for those in authority today is reduce all the strategy and everything to how do we boost energy for production. When you produce, your employment will increase. When you produce, your inflation number will come down. When you produce, your gross domestic product will increase. And we don't need to say we want to start producing everywhere in Nigeria. We can select 6 states. We have 6 geopolitical zones. Look at where they have competitive cost advantage. You can pick, for instance, Anambra in Southeast. You can pick Lagos or Ibadan in Southwest. You can pick Sokoto or Kano in Northwest. You can pick Borno or Taraba. And you can pick Plateau and say, with the partnership with the state, we have to make this nation that is a giant rise again. And let me tell you, the giants of Nigeria will not come for football anymore, and will not come from anything. Yeah, we know how to play football, but that's not the conversation. It is in production, it is in manufacturing, it is in growth. And this is not to reiterate any cliche. It is to say that for our country to be great, and for those that will lead us to remain in our brain, it's going to be what can we give? And when we give ourselves, what are we producing to the rest of the world?
All right, Mr. Alhaji, in closing, I don't want to drag you into politics, but on May 29th, it's going to be exactly midterm. But let's say a year, 2 years from now, this tenure will be over, and all of us will be filing out to say who we want to vote for. And if you understand the way Nigeria works, there are always 4 outcomes in every election. There will be an outright winner. That means if you did the election 100 times, that person will win, clean and fair. There's also the rigged winners who subverted the system. There's also the outright loser. If you do the election 100 times, they will lose 100 times. And then there are also those that are outrigged. That's why they lost, by the rigged winner in that sense. So there are always 4 outcomes. 2027, from what I see and watching politics in Nigeria, is going to be a lot of desperation. What should Nigerians be, what are the questions Nigerians should be asking to decide their fate on who they hand over the commonwealth of their country to going forward? Whether it's President Bola Tinubu, who I expect to seek re-election, or any other person. My question to you is, what is the important question? Because I think we always miss that, shadowed by religion, ethnicity, tribalism, and all whatnot.
First of all, we must admit that Nigeria today lacks viable opposition. And in every democracy that I've studied, why you don't have a one-party system or a monarchical system is because you have an opposition that is constructive, but it's opposition that is viable. I expect that when some of the policies of government or numbers are being released, opposition, whatever party you call them, or the coalition of opposition together, they should provide that viable alternative. If you read about political activity in the 60s, you see viable opposition in late Chief Awolowo, as he provided the people with alternative of what could happen. So when people are asking questions from government, is to say that this is what you should have done. But unfortunately, the opposition in Nigeria, I'm still looking for how viable they are. So for 2027, I'm telling you, if the way opposition and politics appears today, although a day is too long in politics, but if it's the way it appears today, I'm telling you the incumbent may return to office. Now, it may not be as a result of performance, it may not be as a result of non-performance, it may not even be as a result of victory or rigging. That may not be the factor. The fundamental of deciding what is happening will not just be from people, because I'm not sure if you will contest for president in next election, for the president of Federal Republic of Nigeria or a state governor in the next election. Those who may likely contest, if you are not seeing their policy outcome and options to what we have now, because some Nigerian believes these policies are the best, some believe these policies are not the best for them. But if you don't hear the voice of opposition, I am sorry, they might be meeting in their living room or in their party secretariat. It really does not matter if we don't know what alternative to provide. But if that alternative is not there, we forget it. Policies may continue, things may be the same, beyond now to 2027.
Mr. Paul Alaji, always a delight to have you bring your knowledge and your insights to this subject matter. We have one country, and this is our country. We may disagree to disagree. The whole idea is to make sure our country grows, and the economy is the backbone of most of the things we talk about. Paul Alaji is a chief economist at SPM Professionals, joining us from Abuja City. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.